Welcome back, because truly it has been a while, to another episode of Many Such Cases where Jonny and I run through the latest on the Explore page, Moxie, Twitter celeb crossposting, and a quick little channel check-in. Enjoy!
Many Such Cases is a podcast where we have conversations about the communities, cultures, and economies that are emerging on Farcaster.
The only way we can get the podcast recorded.
Let's do it. What do we love?
Guys, it has been a while since we've recorded podcasts. We just have not published them. So
Chad has not published them.
Yeah, I have not published them. I've had my hands full.
The first thing we have here is the Explore page, what we like and what we want to see more of. I mean, we talked about this. I stand by that comment.
Nobody heard about our last conversation.
That's true. So, okay.
Actually, back it up. Okay, Explore page, new middle button on the Warpcast app that basically opens up, and it's a directory of apps, frames, and composer actions, cast actions, whatever, that developers in the ecosystem have created and now can get them added for more streamlined distribution. I think it's a huge win, and let's start with why you also think it's a huge win, but why it's only just a great V1.
Yes. Okay. So I think it's a huge win because it leans into one of Farcaster's core points of differentiation, which is interoperability. It's very easy to build in, on, and around the Farcaster ecosystem in a way that it's not easy to do with other platforms like Instagram and Threads and Twitter and so on. So I think the fact that they're really emphasizing that, like in the product, it's like the main central tab of the product, I think is awesome, like for them and for Warpcast users. And I also think it's awesome for developers because it's exposure, it's distribution, it's a new surface area. So I think like huge win for everybody. I think it's also like a win for users because it's like it answers the question, what can I do here besides just scroll a feed? One of the complaints of Warpcast has been, it's like this weird Twitter Reddit hybrid. And so this opens up a new surface area, a new point of discovery to like do all kinds of new things. The things that I would change.
Wait, can I say what I like?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, wait, give me a chance. What I like about it is that I feel a lot of developers were frustrated because they were like, how does my user find the composer action? I, as a user, didn't like going to ponder.io or any of these other platforms in order to use the developer tools. And so now I don't need to leave the Warpcast app in order to do that. And so to your point, it's a win for Warpcast because I'm not leaving the app. It's a win for the developer because I'm 10 times more likely to be using their app than I was beforehand. And it's a win for the user because I have a more seamless experience. So it is a win-win-win situation. I also think that there's this like meta that, we need to get more culture, like we need to get creators. And I actually think it was a really smart move to lean into Farcaster's core competency, which is its developer and builder ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And I think Facebook API and like its third-party application ecosystem did something similar when they were growing in its early years. And I think that worked really well for Facebook. And so I'm excited to see how it works out for Warpcast, although you and I can talk about the limitations of that as well.
The one complaint that I have and that I would like them to improve on
is constructive criticism that you have.
Yeah, is the lack of context. So I'm just like looking at the Explore page right now, and I see this apps section, I see new and noteworthy, I see actions, and I see frames. I guess like the question is, who is this for? If it's for a brand new user who doesn't, who maybe somehow heard of Farcaster, their friend told them about it, they come here, it's like, well, I'm in an app, so you're showing me apps inside the app. Like, what does that mean? And then new and noteworthy, that's pretty self-explanatory, but actions, like cast actions, what is that? What are frames?
Yeah, the actions thing, I've always, even composer actions and cast actions for me, the language intuitively doesn't click.
Yeah, and so the other thing is like in apps, the interaction is different. So if you look at receipts, hypersub, Ponder, it just bounces you out to a new tab. It bounces you out to Safari, and then the.
So what would you recommend?
Well, like, but other things like Icebreaker and like Intelligent, they show like an app store like detail page that's got a title, description. It's got screenshots. Did you submit an app
store? Did you submit one?
No, but I didn't know that that's what we needed to do in order to get featured like that. So I guess. like I looked in the explore page and I was like, oh, we're already there. We don't need to do anything. Now I realize, oh, if we want to be featured in this way, we need to submit our stuff, which we'll do.
There
But
you
yeah,
go.
it would be context. It would be like, here's what a cast action is. Here's how it's useful. Here are some of the top ones. Here's some use cases, etc. I think doing that for frames and for cast actions, and then also like, it's probably up to the developer, but there's not a lot of surface area for that on these detail pages. Like, for example, with Icebreaker, it's like, how is this Farcaster app? How does it use the social graph? Why is it valuable? Why should I go and check it out? And then if I tap view, it just takes me to a new tab. How is that integrated? Is it just sign in with Farcaster? Like, I feel like the target user here is someone with like zero context. And I think the App Store or the Explore page rather, I know we're not supposed to call it an app store. I think the Explore page could do a lot more to kind of handhold users without any context into like what this ecosystem is, why it's useful, and how it can be used.
Yeah. I think I gave some feedback recently that there was like a little red dot on the Explore page that made it seem like a notification, but then when I clicked it and it opened, I wasn't necessarily sure what was different. I think they had added new cast actions. To your point, like what's the next iteration of this? How do you improve it? I think the number one KPI would be like, are people opening it, using it, and like clicking out through it? And that's probably what they should be looking at. You want to be driving that. And so then like, how do you make that happen? And so the question becomes like, okay, then how does Warpcast the app then market it or drive people to use it? And is it Warpcast's job to do that, or is it the developer's job to do that? So like for instance, the stories, new composer action. Stefan built stories. I love stories. I want to see people's stories. He promoted it. And I was like, well, I want other people to use it. So now I need to market it. And so it's actually quite interesting is that like developers and content creators, I don't know what else to call them, like users should probably work together in a way to be like, okay, we want to drive adoption. I also think Ponder just did a really interesting OP token giveaway by saying like anybody who makes a question, an open-ended question, will get however many OP tokens. So I think we'll start to see new and novel marketing mechanisms go to market or like growth mechanisms. But I think then the question still becomes is like, okay, there's plenty of like room to experiment as the developer, but what is Warpcast's job in driving people to be using this and actually like understanding what the Explore page is?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a similar dynamic with like the Apple App Store, which is Apple drives a ton of users, distribution, revenue, etc., which causes developers to put a lot more effort into their products, into marketing the product, into driving users to the App Store, and the cycle kind of repeats. And I think there's probably a similar dynamic that should emerge here with Farcaster, or well, with Warpcast and the apps that are building on the network, which is, hey, look, we have this new surface area of discovery that's going to drive distribution. Developers are going to see that and say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to now invest more of our time and resources into this because it's giving us value. And then the more that they do that, the easier it then becomes for the Warpcast team to kind of talk about what's happening. And then now you have like a little flywheel that's going.
Exactly.
I agree. I think the way you've described it as like a funnel, if that was observable, and became a tool for Warpcast to go to developers and say, hey, here's what we're doing for you. This is good ammo for allocating continued effort into what you're doing on Farcaster. I think that would be super valuable. Moving on.
Anything else? Yeah, I was like, anything else about it? It was so funny. I was chatting with somebody and I was like, oh, what do you think? And they're like, it's a good idea. Shipped it a bit too late. I was like, oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just made me giggle. Okay. Whether you could have shipped it earlier or later is interesting.
One of the jokes I like to make with like product is that a product manager can have a conversation or a sketch at a whiteboard that takes minutes or hours that then results in a designer having to spend weeks or multiple weeks that then results in an engineer having to spend multiple months or quarters. So the time scales of like actually getting product shipped into production is much, much longer than I think people really appreciate. So you can like have the thought in your mind using Warpcast like months ago and being like, oh, this should have an explore page. Like the thought occurs in like a second. And then you could think through it, have a discussion over a few minutes and be like, oh yeah, they should totally have that. It's like, yeah, But to design that and to build that takes many months and has to be factored into all the other competing priorities that you have. So like,
Well,
I don't know. I'm
like, you realize that they don't have like a dedicated developer relations person. It's
sure.
like
It's
there's
Dan.
a senior staff level engineer who is then coordinating and liaising with like however many ends of like engineering teams to get this stuff on the platform too, and
Yeah.
like going back and forth of like, oh, this isn't, we need this, we're missing this, etc., etc. So anyways, I just giggled to myself because I was like, everything is relative, and
Yeah, it takes time. Things
Yeah.
take time. I mean, we're shipping ideas that we had 6 months ago. It just takes time. So, especially with small team, and the fact that, Merkle raised a bunch of money doesn't change the fact that their team is still small and that focus is the scarce resource. Like Nick actually just had a great tweet about this, like teams that raise a bunch of money. Nick Tomino from One Confirmation talked about, you can raise all the money in the world, but the hard thing is like focusing. And I think Dan has talked about this as well. So like you've got tens or in some cases hundreds of ideas, good ideas that are coming at you. How do you sequence those in a way that is moving the needle? Yeah. So get the criticism. Yeah, they should have done this a long time ago. And believe me, I'm such a like interoperability maxi. To me, that is like the killer feature of crypto. And there's not nearly enough founders that even understand that or are leaning into that. But I understand why it's taken as long as it has. So I get it.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Next topic.
Moxie.
Yeah. Moxie has taken over everyone's timelines. Do you want to give me a quick TLDR in your understanding, and I can fill in the blanks or let you know where maybe I have a different understanding?
I will try. So
Okay.
I'll start off by saying that like one of the chief complaints of Moxie is that it's complicated. It's too complicated to understand. And
Can
I'm
I say one
sympathetic
thing,
to that.
though?
Yes.
I will say is complicated to understand. As someone who's not like trying to game or farm the system, and I have the benefit of being a OG, okay? It is actually relatively very, very simple to claim Moxie. My understanding is like cast good content, contribute to the ecosystem by creating good content and engaging with other people, and I am rewarded in Moxie tokens that in fact are quite easy to claim, but hard to understand.
Yeah. Now, hard to understand may not matter. I think Oxen had a funny cast about this. He's like, tokens don't need to be easy to understand in order to be used and traded. DeFi taught us that. So I guess though that it has been just something that people have complained a lot about. And I mean, it has been kind of a barrier, I think, to entry, which is you're just trying to understand, like, what is this? How does it work? What am I supposed to do? I think the thing with degen was the form factor was like very simple. It was like tips, and so it's just like this very simple, easy to grok thing. And it's like someone could, tip you in this structured way, and then you got those tokens, and like that's it. Moxie is not like that. There's frames, there's cast actions, there's auctions, there's fan tokens, which so far as I understand is like a user token. Those get auctioned at certain days.
And well, there's 3 types of fan tokens.
Okay,
as I
3
said,
types of fan
like,
tokens.
You can, and I didn't participate in the auctions. Like, and guys, this is like not just because this is like Moxie agnostic. I just like don't have time or energy to like be participating in like buying most of these things. Like I usually receive stuff like through airdrops, and I always say like we were laughing about this in the Voice Club Discord. It's like the only reason I still have a Discord account is I was like, damn, if I wasn't so like principles driven and like focused on like need to build something super long term, I could probably have made a lot of money. But instead, I'm SOL.
Yeah, you're playing the game on hard mode like the rest of us.
But there were auctions where you could buy into these, and I think a lot of people did buy into these, but you could buy a fan token for a user, so like TED or nonlinear. You could buy a fan token for a channel like memes or TED or Club TED, and then you would buy fan token for the Farcaster network. So there's 3 tokens. When I cast, this is my understanding of how it works. Correct me if I'm wrong. When I cast, based on the engagement that cast receives, that cast earns Moxie. I receive a portion of that Moxie. Everybody who owns my fan token earns a portion of that Moxie. Whatever channel I casted it in, whoever owns that channel's fan token gets a portion of that Moxie, and then anyone holding the Farcaster network fan token also gets that.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And then there's also, I think, depending on who you interact with, then they get Moxie as well. And that's why
Yes.
we've heard about like reply farming. So
So this is our critique. I think this is like the number one complaint that a lot of people have, especially Linda from Bountycaster, because she's like, you've 10x my replies, yet it's really hard to distinguish like signal from noise because now I'm like looking at all these notifications. I have to go through all the notifications, and like her number one priority is like, I need to service users. I need to solve the problems of users, and it's now 10 times harder for me to like just get to the problem and be able
yeah.
to help them out.
Well, it's especially painful for founders because I think that there's some like number of users who've realized, okay, well, the founders. So the other thing with Moxie is like the higher your open rank maybe, or the more followers you have, that like the more your reply is worth. Like, so for example, if you or I reply to someone, they're going to get more Moxie, they're going to get more money than if someone else replies to them. And so many of the
Someone went to lunch yesterday and I replied to their cast while they were at lunch with a bunch of people. If you're listening, you know who you are. And he looks up and he goes, Ted just paid for lunch with Moxie.
Yeah, so a lot of the users whose replies are worth a lot also happen to be founders. And so the people who are farming are like, oh, I'll just ask them questions about their product, because then that's what's going to get their attention. And I've seen this with Hypersub, is people will be like, oh, like they'll ask me, how does this work? Or they'll intentionally misrepresent how it works. And
So
to be
that
like,
you
do I
have
have
to
that right? Yeah. And so it's like really annoying
smart,
because
but it's
like,
annoying.
it's smart because it's like, oh, you're kind of like, you figured out the vulnerability of the founder who's going to respond about questions to their product. Linda, this is so funny to me. Like crypto's like such a game of cat and mouse. Linda then geniusly like is like, oh, I'll just respond from the Bountycaster account, which
She's
doesn't
such a
which
giggle. She's
it's so smart. It's
I'm
like
she's so smart.
yeah, because then like I can answer these questions without people earning money. So if they're genuinely asking because they want to know, they're going to get their answer. But if they're just farming, then they're not going to get anything. But even that requires like a ton of effort. So she's been saying, hey, why can I just turn off Moxie rewards on my replies? I should be able to do that. I think Jason's kind of the founder of Moxie is trying to, they're whatever. He's saying, yeah, we'll think about this. But I've noticed this too. Like a lot of people will ask me a question about Hypersub and I'm like, there's no way that you don't know the answer to this. Like, I'm just not going to reply. And it's funny. I feel like I reply way less. Like because I just kind of assume that I'm being farmed. And so I'm like, I don't want to play this game. I'm not going to reply at all. So it's funny. It's actually had the opposite of the intended effect, which was to increase engagement, to increase the quality of engagement. For me, I feel like I'm just like a turtle that's gone into their shell. I'm like, fuck this. I don't want to be mined.
But I think it's like, because you're a founder and you're like, my time is precious. It's different, I would say, for me, because part of like what I'm building is a community. And so it actually is like meaningful if I reply to people. And I would say like, that's also like how I built my personal brand, was by just being in the comments and like having actual conversations with people on Warpcast. And so it has made me respond to people more in some ways, but I'm highly skeptical because I'm like, you're a new face that I hadn't seen before,
right.
And I can't tell your intentions. And this is where my existential crisis cast came from, where I was like, oh, we all need to shift our default mental model to just assume that everything we see is fake and like question whether or not it's true, instead of just like seeing something and assuming it's true. And now I'm like, holy shit, I'm living that reality, in that I'm assuming everything I see in my replies is like fake or botted. And I'm like, this is depressing. Like, I think I would rather assume this is a real person with true intentions, and I'll respond, and hopefully they are. And it's a lot better of a life to live.
I feel the opposite, actually. And I've been doing this for probably like a year. I just assume that everything is fake. I assume it's all a psyop. And I don't believe anything unless I get it from the primary source.
This is a little bit different from news. I just meant like, obviously, dude, I don't trust the government. Like, I don't trust like anyone. Like, of course, I don't do that. But I mean, like with people on a social network that
I
I'm
see.
like, oh, okay, I need to build community. Like, it's actually really depressing if you show up and you're like, oh, I'm just talking to myself. None of these people care about me. Like, that's like kind of a fucked up way to look at the world.
I
And what
see.
I've learned through Club Ted Poker is that most of the people who I'm like, oh, I thought maybe they were fake, like, they're showing up to poker and they're playing and they're like joining voice chat or they're like typing in the chat. And I'm like, oh, you're a real person. Like, and you're participating and engaging, because I think that goes a long way. Otherwise, I see the same person, he like likes every cast within seconds and then immediately replies. And I'm like, this is a bot.
Yeah,
There's no
right.
way. There's no way.
Yeah, you were telling me the story about this woman on TikTok who had a ton of followers, super viral, then did an IRL event because she's like, oh, I have this big audience.
And
There's
no
all these people that
one
engage,
showed
and no one showed
up.
up.
And she
Right,
brought like friendship bracelets to give out to everybody. And they were
right.
like, the TikTok algorithm is faking it. This is why I would rather have, it says I have 300,000 followers, whatever, however many, but my engagement numbers are like not at that scale. I'd rather have that because then it means my like engagement numbers are like more true to what reality is, versus like me thinking, okay, all these automated bot accounts are quote unquote viewing it. And
Yeah, I disagree. I'm kind
I
of
know,
with Dan
I
on
know,
this.
I know you
Yeah.
disagree, but we don't want to get into this on this
Okay.
one.
All right, fine.
In terms of Moxie, like I will say, JTGI, John from Automod, I have so much respect for him. I think we've talked about him before about how I just, I
He's
think
the best.
He's yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
love John.
And he's optimistic. He's like so optimistic and future oriented. And he said something and it's just stuck with me. I don't want to say it as if it's my own thought. He's like, I think it's so fucking cool that you have someone like Jason, like going into the arena and trying new things. And Moxie is a brand new thing. And it also pressure tests the network. And I think everybody who's a user needs to be like, yeah, it's annoying, but also we might as well figure this out and figure out how to deal with farming, or, oh, there's all this spam, or, oh, here's a new tipping before the network is 100,000, a million, etc. users. Like, that's my take on it, is like, now is actually the time to be testing some of these things before we get to scale and things can break a lot easier and have a more profound negative impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what makes Farcaster so cool, is that you can have some third party like Jason and his team at Airstack, and they can just have their own ideas and their own design for what they would like to see. And they can put it out into the world and it can completely change the behavior of the network overnight, which is effectively what happened. And I think that what success for the network looks like, hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of developers doing that, and the network being a little bit like what it feels like to walk around a city, which is that some neighborhoods are dangerous and shitty and bad and not places you really want to hang out, and then other places are really nice and other places are up and coming. You have parks, you have like
You have Club
like
Ted.
downtown.
Yeah.
Exactly, you have Club Ted. Like, that's what a thriving, living place looks like and feels like. It's not uniform, it's not the same, that there's a lot of divergence. And so I think like that's what, just the network becoming robust to these kinds of permissionless innovations, I think is a good thing. I mean, and I think I agree with John that like we are in the very early stages of this, which is why it feels so volatile. Like when DGen came out, it took our cozy little group chat, right? And it turned it into this crazy like crypto casino, like pretty much overnight.
You can tell who wasn't here pre DGen and Frames because it's the James Franco meme where he's like, first time. Yeah. Because this is like ultimately why I boycotted it, because I was like, oh my God, this is like wild. Like, what is this? And I'm like, oh guys, like we've already been through a cycle of this.
Yeah, totally. And there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah, like the people complaining now are like somewhat part of the initial cycle that disrupted the people before, and it's just going to keep happening.
And I mean, I think what success looks like is that the volatility, like the impact on the network of those things becomes less and less volatile over time.
Yes.
Which is like, it kind of doesn't matter. It's like if someone does construction next to your house, it's super volatile. But like if someone does it on the other side of town, you're like, oh, whatever, I don't even notice. But there's constantly construction going on. And it's like, I don't know, it's like every new project, every new way to monetize interactions, I don't know, I'd like to see it get to a point where it's just cool. It's just a design space that's explored. And if you would like for it to impact your experience, it certainly can, but it doesn't have to. Yeah. I think that's like, and I think some of this is like a client thing. In fact, maybe a lot of it is. And some of it maybe isn't. I don't know. Like maybe it's...
I will say that I was playing around with Wildcard. Shout out to Karan, DeFi Karan. But he's created an app around these like new ecosystems and projects where like there's like a degen channel, there's a ham channel, there's a whatever channel. The way that he's kind of exploring a client around that is quite smart, because there will always be a group of people who come to Farcaster who are very financially motivated or like are on that speculative, can't speak English today, speculative like casino-esque side of the spectrum, that app is like perfect for them.
Yeah. There's a guy working on a streaming project called stream.tv, and he just supported like subscriber gated live streams, and I've been testing it with them. Yeah. And so what's cool about it is that as soon as you launch a stream to subscribe, like your hypersub subscribers only, it'll create a frame, and then the only people that can join it are the people that have an active subscription.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and the chat.
This is perfect.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the chat, like the live stream chat, is literally just threaded casts to the live stream cast.
Casts.
So like
that's like almost a marketing play.
Exactly. And that's kind of my point, which is that like you can have these communities of gamblers, meme coin launchers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, come on.
And live streamers and all this stuff happening.
For my poker game, I'm not going to stream anything else.
It's perfect. It's like the perfect thing. So the point is that like you can have these activities, whether it's community building, whether it's gambling, whether it's streaming, like whatever it is. And I like the idea that it doesn't have to like take over the whole feed. It doesn't have to take over your whole experience. That it just is like, it's something that's happening and you can kind of dip your toe into whatever of these different worlds that are emerging.
Yeah.
I think that's like the future that I would like to see. And it's hard right now because the network is so small.
Yeah.
So anytime there's a big change, it kind of like, it takes over.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Moving on.
Wrapping up Moxie?
Yeah, wrapping up Moxie.
Okay, we have... the other hotly contested feature, Twitter celebrities cross-posting to Warpcast. So I can tee this one up because I feel like this like Club T figured it out. Club Ted. So Club Ted was like sleuthing around and I was like, hey, look, this person is active again. And then somebody else went and found other people who are active again. And they're like, wait, this is mimicking what's happening on Twitter. What's going on? Are they using Yup? Are they cross-posting? And then someone super smart went back in time and said, oh no, Dan Romero had already casted that they're going to experiment with enabling people who have large Twitter followings, who tweet a lot of content. Cast is just my default word now. To start cross-posting to Warpcast directly, because the number one feedback they're getting is that, it's just like too much effort to then open up the Warpcast app. And I noticed it because I was like, these people are casting really good things, but they're like not using channels. And so I was like, hey guys, can you like encourage them to use channels? Like, I don't know them. And that's how I found out. I was like, oh, okay, this is something new. Do you want to recap what some of the sentiments in the community are?
Yeah, and so there's a number of folks on Farcaster who've basically kind of been dunking on this, I think, in one form or another. There's been, I think, a little bit of backlash.
What's the backlash? Yeah. Why are they, what's the pushback?
I think there's a few points of criticism. I think the most predominant one is that there's not engagement. So what it looks like is happening is someone is just kind of syndicating to Warpcast or to Farcaster, and then they're not replying. Like, so they'll get genuine engagement on Farcaster, and then because they're just cross-posting, they're not actually like engaging with the people that are interacting with them on Farcaster. And so then there's this sort of reaction to that, which is like, hey, what are you doing? And I'm sympathetic to that. And I mean, I'm gonna just like both sides this, because like, what has Dan been saying for the longest time? Like, content. Like, that is the existential crisis of Farcaster right now. So what has he done? He's gotten people that post bangers on like the biggest text-based social network in the world, and he's syndicating that to Farcaster. Very clever, smart idea. And the fact that these people are his friends, he got him to do it, I think it's like super smart. And I totally understand that like Farcaster is not Twitter. It has its own people, its own culture, its own kind of like thing that's going on. And so it feels very fake and foreign when it's like there's just this like artificial kind of injection of content. and then people aren't engaging. That's what's made Farcaster valuable for so long, is the engagement, is that you can interact with smart people and have interesting conversations. Despite DGen and Moxie and all these other like money games that have been played, I think one thing that's been true from the very beginning is that you can have phenomenal conversations with smart people in a way that is really hard to have happen on Twitter. And so the fact that now you've got a Twitter-like dynamic where it's just like people posting and there's not really an interaction, it just, I think for a lot of people feels kind of lame. My view on this is like, I don't care. I think it's like a good experiment. I'm glad they're doing it. And I don't take it personally if like Mike Solana doesn't reply to my cast, in the same way I don't take it personally that he doesn't reply to my tweets.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm with you. I would also say there's options here. If you don't want to see content from people who aren't going to engage back with you, don't follow them, mute them.
Yeah.
It's solvable. Second, I think after I boycotted the platform because of DGen, I came back and was like, okay, I need to just like always take the long-term view on this. And for me, the long-term view here is like, okay, great. In an ideal world, you do want these people to be on the platform. There's no way for them to build an audience on Farcaster unless they are casting content. Like, people aren't going to find them organically. It's just going to be hard to discover them unless they're casting content, meaning that they can build their audience concurrently without actually having to put effort into building their Warpcast audience. Now, let's say Farcaster has another frames moment where like 100,000 people end up onboarding. This means that, I don't know, Mark Andreessen or Packy will come and be like, I have 20,000 followers here already. Like, it actually is worth my effort to continue leaning into it. Whereas if they weren't casting content and weren't building an audience, that number would still be at like 200 or like 2,000. And for them, I'd be like, that doesn't make sense. So like my long-term view is like, this is a huge net positive for the network. I understand, like, as somebody who loves engaging on the timeline, yes, I was annoyed too. I was like, 0x Mert won't respond to anything. And then once I realized that he's not responding to some things, I was like, oh, okay, like, then I'm not going to keep trying to like respond to his cast. And like, that's it. Out of sight, out of mind. Otherwise, I still read them.
Yeah, let me play devil's advocate.
Okay.
Which is that there was a moment in time, like, you know, years and years ago, where there's this question for a company, like, what's your social media strategy? And then what people realized is that you can't have a, quote, social media strategy. You have to have like a YouTube strategy or a Facebook strategy or an Instagram strategy or a Snapchat strategy. And the reason why is because the networks, the content, the people on each of these platforms was sufficiently differentiated that one size does not fit all, and that you have to make content that's kind of unique to these platforms, and you have to interact with people that's unique to these platforms.
Your point is going to be that Twitter is like very broadcast oriented, where Farcaster is very conversation oriented.
That's right. And so people on Farcaster like reading these conversations. They like reading the interactions, like the engagement.
I agree with you, but then their strategy, like the growth strategy for them, isn't going to work. Like, people who don't interact aren't going to grow a following, period.
Yeah. And I think it's a good experiment, and I'm bearish on it working.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's different than I thought you were saying it was like a good thing. And now you're like,
it's a good experiment. No, it's a very good experiment.
Okay.
I think that and I think it's a great way to bootstrap good content from well-known people. I think in order for it to work, those well-known people are going to have to do more than just
I agree.
syndicate their broadcasts from Twitter. They're going to have to actually interact with people in a way that feels native to Farcaster. In the same way that you cannot be like, this is why like the people who are famous on YouTube are like nowhere near as famous on like TikTok.
Okay, but I will also say,
same
like,
is true across all these platforms.
Okay. This is what I tell everyone. Everyone's like, oh, like you've built this like whatever brand, blah blah blah, and chain brand. I'm like, no, like I haven't. Like, no one has it figured out. And so I think that we think that this is what works on Warpcast, but no one actually knows yet. Like, no one actually knows what works well, and how are we measuring like who does the best. I look at other people on the network and I'm like, they have nowhere near as many followers, but they've made a lot more freaking money than I have. So does that actually mean that their strategy is better than my strategy? And so I just don't think it's a one size fits all for Warpcast, generally speaking, and we're still experimenting with what works and what doesn't work. And yes, the original group of people who joined the network do really value back and forth conversation. We don't know if that's what attracts the rest of the network.
Okay, my response to that would be that take everybody off the follow list and just take them out of the cohort and say like there's no signal here because we all like, you know, in other words, we shouldn't be looking at this cohort of users.
There is no follow list.
Well, the people that have been on it for a very long time. So basically take them and say that, yeah, us and however many, like probably like 100 or 200 other people, and say that whatever they did is not an indicator of what anyone else can do to get followers. And say, but then fine, look at people like Proxy. Like he's a great example of someone who was never on the auto follow list, but who did build up an audience and who has made money. And I think a lot of that has come through like authentic engagement with people. So like,
I think that's what will win pretty much everywhere though. Like
I agree. And when we say win, it's not money, it's status, it's followers, which is status.
I don't know.
Maybe it is money.
No, this is another conversation, but like authenticity wins is like, I don't think numbers matter. I don't look at like my follower count. I don't even know how many followers I have. I really measure like my sense of brand by like Club TED and who's coming to Club TED events and like who is like consistently responding. And actually like recently I was like, oh, I used to have like thoughtful people in my replies. And I thought about it and was like, is my content like not thought provoking anymore where I like don't have like people whose opinions I respect engaging or like pushing back against it sometimes. And for me, like that mattered.
I think that's right. I think like,
yeah, I always get really angry when like you or Dan is always like, it's status, it's money. And I was like, you guys have known me for years now. Like, how do you not know what the fuck motivates me yet?
So, okay, let me...
No. We're not gonna do like armchair expert psychoanalyze TED on this episode. We can skip past that. Okay, next topic. Do we want to talk about network school? I think let's put a pin in network school. I think what we'll say is that we're excited about the concept of a network school. I think, again, going back to Jason Goldberg and Moxie, it's just really inspiring to see someone go all in on an idea that they're passionate about and bring it to life. I think where we all have big questions as Farcaster users is what does it actually mean when Balaji states, I'm building the network school on top of Farcaster?
To add a little more detail there, it's sometimes that might just mean sign in with Farcaster and that's it. And it can also mean like there's a channel, there's a group chat on Warpcast, you're using Ponder, you're using Hypersub, you're using Paragraph, you're using Receipts, you're using this whole ecosystem of products and services in and around Hypersub. There's a huge spectrum of what it means. Yeah, that's the only like detail I would add to the comment.
Okay, cool. Nice. I agree. There's a lot there. Okay,
channel check-in.
Next topic. We used to be obsessed with channels.
On all the episodes.
Every episode, it would just become a channel episode. And a lot of people are fading channels. They're just hashtags. And I kind of have to agree.
I think the enthusiasm around channels has kind of ebbed and flowed. And I think around FarCon, slightly before, during, and slightly after, there was just a huge amount of enthusiasm and stoke around what can be done. It's this new primitive, they're on chain, there's economic models that people are experimenting with, moderation, ownership, etc. And I think that what's happened is a lot of that energy is kind of diffused. It's kind of died out. And my sense is that it's because the deprioritization from the Warpcast team is that it doesn't feel like there's been a lot of effort and work, or innovation put into the channel primitive. It feels like everything just kind of fizzled.
Yeah.
They don't feel like a place.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like, and I've really felt this as like, with the memes channel, with other channels that I moderate or that I work on, it just kind of felt like something that I actually found super discouraging and started to just kind of made me kind of give up was when, the multiple times that Dan and Varun have said, well, people don't go to channels. They just consume channel content directly from their feed.
I was like, why would I ever put any effort into a channel when the founders are like, people aren't going into channels? And I was like, okay. Why would I ever do anything?
Yeah, and if you want the owners of those channels to feel a sense of ownership, then the response should be to drive users to the channel, not to say, well, people don't go there, and so since they don't go there, we're going to make it we're going to deprioritize that. It's like what the channel owners want is for users to go there. And if Warpcast drove them there, I feel like there'd be a greater sense of ownership and willingness to like experiment and innovate and do stuff. But since a lot of people were like, well, I'm not really getting any channel usage, so I'm going to just kind of like whatever, I'll kind of throw in the towel, which is sort of what feels like happened.
Yeah. So I will say it's like very interesting. I agree with you. I think the design of how do you discover channels. So I did like 20 plus like random calls when I tweeted once, like, if you don't get Warpcast, like, let me know. Everyone was like, I don't understand channels. Like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. They're like, it's displayed like a story, so you think it's ephemeral at the top, but then you realize, oh, it's not ephemeral. And then it's like, what is the best channel? Like, where do I go and find this stuff? And so in the same way that I think that they created like explore page for, what's it called? For apps.
Cast actions, frames,
I
apps,
think that what they like need to do, and maybe there just isn't enough there, is like they need to create an explore page for like the top clubs or communities, clubs. I'm like, had been spending time on Orb, and they called their channels clubs. And they actually do like quite a good job of like surfacing like, oh, here's new interesting clubs where like it might align with your interests. And I think that might make people go like, oh, this is interesting. Because Success is a channel that I think is doing like wildly well. And it's about like personal development and improvement. And like they have a hyper sub around it and it's doing really well. And it truly is like its own community. And I think one piece of feedback is that channels aren't actually like distinct communities. They're just the same people who have various interests in each. And so like if you want to go and target any of those, like you're pretty much targeting the same people. And I don't think that was the point of channels. I think another good example of what channels could be is like Murtaza and what he's doing and like drop what's his news thing. And so then it becomes two things. It's like, okay, how do you find existing community builders on the ecosystem today who can then like own and actually curate a channel like you and then like have the channel displayed? I think it's like more motivating for like people who have like more niche interest areas to make a good channel. And then the other way is like, okay, find a really good content creator who can then build a channel up from scratch, like Meritus or Murtaza, who then can create like onboard and like have a brand new community in there. Murtaza and the Success channel are very, very specific actual topics. This whole like, oh, it's a hashtag instead of a community thing is maybe a product of just not having enough people on the network. And so then it's like, okay, would you like, why then prioritize channels if we just don't have enough people to be populating these channels anyways? Then it makes sense of why you would want to focus on supply of content, main feed, so that you can attract more users who can then at some point do channels. I don't know, like it's kind of like chicken or the egg. And I think that's the stance that maybe Merkle has taken. I think it could be a really interesting experiment for somebody else to go the channel first experiment instead of the main feed first experiment.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was just about to say, which is like, well, is this getting the causal arrow backwards? Yeah, like is the reason why there isn't great content is because the channel primitive still feels like in this really immature state. And so if they did make it more mature, where it was on chain, it was more composable, then the content would emerge because people feel like, oh, great, this is like a home for me and my community on the internet. My like grand vision for channels was like, oh, in the same way that a domain name is kind of like a internet native real estate, like a Farcaster channel could be like internet native social container. And so if the onboarding around setting that up, if that was great, and if people really did feel the kind of ownership they feel when they go in a domain where like that's like this infinite frontier, like I could do whatever I want, I could build whatever I want, and there were like powerful tools that they could put together to make that happen. You could argue, well, like that would be the rocket boosters for channels specifically, and then Farcaster, the network generally, to kind of take off. That assumes that's like a build it and they will come model. I think Dan's take would be the opposite, which is no. Like you need to get the content first, the people first, posting in the existing, network, and then once that's like popping off, then you can start to kind of verticalize it and categorize it and figure out how to like get it into these different channels and make it composable and so on. So yeah. I don't have like a strong stance. I just think it's like worth going down that like thought path of like, well, are we really sure that the reason why it's not working is because it's a
will
content
also
issue.
say, I'm interrupting, but
That's
I
okay.
will say is like I do think it also Dan said this when he came on to our podcast. He's like, it's really hard to port over a community. And
Yeah.
he's right. Like he's
Yep.
100% right. And so that's the other thing is like, okay, great. You could start with like channels, but channels, if they're communities, that either means you have to start from zero or you have to port over an existing community. And the only people who have done this well is Try Your Best, TYB, Ty Haney's, and they're working with specific brands and bringing them on. But at the same time, these brands didn't have like discords. Like they were just like interacting with the people who are like now they're community members on Instagrams or like TikToks. Oh, they didn't actually have anywhere where they were like, oh, here's our community and here's how we're communicating and managing them. It was just on a different social platform. Actually, taking a step back, I don't know that much about like software tools, but all of TYB's clients are like girly brands. Like I bet 90% of their users are women. That makes sense. So then I'm like, okay, who's more text-based that might be interacting with their clients or like their users on Twitter? It's like, okay, like it's like what
who is
brand,
that?
what communities are left?
Yeah.
Like they're on
none.
Discord then.
Right.
So I don't know. Anyway,
Well, this is where I think like iteration at the product level could be really powerful for channels, which is like, yeah, make them more visual.
I agree.
That was a good channel
That's
check-in.
it.
I think
That
it's
was
been
good.
like
I think
update for a while.
I think we're at time. So
I agree.
anyways, that's it. That's this episode of Many Such Cases.